Waitress feeds a homeless black man with kindness. What she discovers about him later makes her scream in pure terror. The Californian afternoon sun poured over the busy streets of Los Angeles, bathing the city in a golden glow that contrasted with the elongated shadows of the skyscrapers. In the heart of this urban setting, the Morning Star Cafe was a cozy refuge, an oasis of freshly ground coffee aromas and muffled laughter. Chloe Mason, a 25-year-old with brown hair and a messy bun, moved gracefully between the tables, balancing trays with the dexterity of someone who had been doing it for years. His green eyes, always attentive, roamed the room, anticipating customers' needs before they even expressed them. "More coffee, Mr. Thompson?" she asked with a warm smile, already tilting the steaming carafe over the businessman's empty cup. "You read minds, Chloe," he replied with a grateful wink. Chloe smiled, but her eyes had already wandered to the window, where a lone figure caught her eye. A man was sitting on the sidewalk, his back against the wall of the cafe. His dark, disheveled hair framed a face marked by time and adversity, but there was something in his eyes, a glint of intelligence, perhaps even resignation, that intrigued her. She watched him for a few moments, noticing how out of place he seemed among the hurried passers-by and the gleaming cars, her heart squeezed with a mixture of compassion and curiosity. "Chloe, table 5!" The voice of her boss, Frank, brought her back to reality. She nodded quickly and went back to work, but her thoughts kept returning to the man outside. When her shift finally ended, Chloe hesitated at the back door of the cafe. In her hands, she held a plate covered in aluminum foil, the remains of the day's special that would normally be thrown away. Taking a deep breath, she walked around the building. The man was still there, now huddled against the cold that was beginning to set in as night fell. Chloe approached cautiously, her heart beating a little faster. "Excuse me," she said softly. The man looked up, surprised. I've brought you something to eat if you like." For a moment, he just stared at her, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you." His voice was husky, but there was a softness in it that Chloe hadn't expected. "That's very kind of you." Chloe smiled, handing him the plate. "It's nothing, really. I'm Chloe, by the way." "Jamal," he replied, accepting the plate with trembling hands. Chloe hesitated, torn between the desire to continue the conversation and the fear of being intruded upon. But something about that man, Jamal, intrigued her deeply. "Do you mind if I sit down for a while?" she asked, indicating the space next to him on the sidewalk. Jamal looked surprised again, but made an inviting gesture. Chloe settled down next to him, ignoring the curious stares of the passers-by. "So, Jamal," she began, trying to keep her voice light and friendly, "are you from Los Angeles?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, I'm not, but I've been here for long enough." Chloe nodded, sensing that there was much more behind those simple words. "And before that, where did you come from?" Jamal was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on a distant point. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with restrained emotion. "From a place very different from this one, a place where I had purpose." The way he spoke, the weight behind his words, made Chloe lean a little closer. "What happened?" she asked softly. Jamal looked at her then, and Chloe was struck by the depth of pain in his eyes. "Sometimes, Chloe, knowledge is too heavy a burden to carry." She frowned, puzzled. "What kind of knowledge?" But Jamal just shook his head, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Maybe it's better not to know. Sometimes ignorance is bliss." Chloe wanted to press, wanted to understand more about this enigmatic man, but something in his posture made her back down. Instead, she changed the subject, talking about the cafe, about the city, about nothing in particular. As they talked, Chloe became more and more impressed with Jamal's intelligence and articulation. He talked about literature, philosophy, and science with an ease that contrasted sharply with his worn appearance. His every word only added to the mystery surrounding him. The hours passed without Chloe noticing, the night falling completely upon them. When she finally looked at her watch, she was shocked to see that it was already past midnight. "Oh my God, I have to go," she exclaimed, getting up hastily. "My shift starts early tomorrow." Jamal nodded, a genuine smile lighting up his face for the first time. "Thank you, Chloe. Not just for the food, but for the company. It's been a long time since anyone talked to me like that." Chloe felt her heart squeeze. Can I come back tomorrow? Bring more food?" There was a noticeable hesitation before Jamal answered. "You're very kind, Chloe, but maybe it's best not to get too involved with someone like me." "Someone like you?" Chloe repeated, confused. "What do you mean?" Jamal sighed deeply. "Just trust me. It's better that way." Chloe wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she didn't care whatever he was hiding, but something in the firmness of his voice made her stop. Instead, she just nodded. "All right, Jamal, but if you change your mind, I'll be around." As she walked away, Chloe couldn't help but look back. Jamal was still sitting there, a solitary figure against the wall of the cafe. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of gratitude and sadness, that stuck in Chloe's mind. That night, lying in her bed, Chloe couldn't stop thinking about Jamal. Who was he really? What had driven him to the streets? And why did she feel that there was much more to his story than he was willing to reveal? With these questions swirling around in her mind, Chloe finally fell asleep, unaware that her chance meeting with Jamal was about to change the course of her life forever. The days that followed Chloe's initial encounter with Jamal were marked by a routine that quickly became familiar. Every evening after her shift at the Morning Star Cafe, Chloe found herself gravitating towards that same patch of sidewalk, a hot plate in her hands and a growing curiosity in her heart. Jamal was always there, as if that small space in the city was the only place where he could exist. His eyes, deep and mysterious, lit up with a gleam of recognition every time Chloe approached. "Good evening, Jamal," Chloe greeted him, taking a seat next to him with an ease that surprised them both. "How was your day?" It was a simple, almost banal question, but for Jamal, it seemed to carry the weight of the world. He hesitated, his hands shaking slightly as he accepted the plate, before answering with a sad smile. "As always, Chloe, watching, thinking, remembering." There was something in that answer, in the way his voice trembled as he pronounced the last word, that made Chloe's heart squeeze. She wanted to understand, she wanted to help, but she knew she had to be patient. Conversations flowed naturally between them, covering topics ranging from classic literature to the latest scientific discoveries. Chloe was constantly impressed by the depth of Jamal's knowledge, and even more intrigued by the contrast between his worn appearance and his brilliant mind. It was on a particularly cold night, when the biting Los Angeles wind seemed to penetrate to the bone, that something changed. Chloe arrived with an extra blanket in addition to the usual food, concerned for Jamal's well-being. "You didn't need it," he murmured, but his eyes betrayed his gratitude. Chloe settled down next to him, pulling some of the blanket over herself. The shared warmth created a bubble of intimacy between them, momentarily isolating them from the world around them. "Jamal," Chloe began, her voice little more than a whisper, "who are you really?" The silence that followed was so thick that Chloe could almost touch him. Jamal remained motionless for so long that she began to wonder if he had even heard the question. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. His eyes were filled with a mixture of fear, resignation, and relief. "Chloe," he said, his voice hoarse with restrained emotion, "there are things about me that could put you in danger. I don't want that for you." Chloe felt her heart racing. "What kind of danger? Jamal, please tell me what's going on." Jamal closed his eyes, as if gathering his courage. When he opened them again, there was a determination in them that Chloe had never seen before. "My real name isn't Jamal," he began. "It's Dr. James Allen. I'm a computer scientist, one of the best in my field." Chloe blinked in surprise. Although she had suspected there was more to Jamal than met the eye, this was beyond her wildest expectations. "I used to work for Cybertech Industries," Jamal, or James, continued. "We were developing a revolutionary technology, something that could change the world." His voice shook slightly. "But then I discovered the truth. They didn't want to use our technology for good. They wanted to create a mass surveillance system, something that could invade the privacy of millions of people." Chloe felt a shiver run down her spine. "What did you do?" "I tried to stop them," James replied, his voice laden with regret. "I tried to alert the authorities, but Cybertech is powerful. They have connections everywhere. No one listened to me." He paused, his eyes straying into painful memories. "So I made a drastic decision. I faked my own death and disappeared. It was the only way to stay alive and stop them using my knowledge for their nefarious plans." Chloe was stunned. Her mind was spinning with the implications of what James was revealing. "But why are you living on the streets? Why didn't you seek help?" James laughed bitterly. "Whose help, Chloe? Cybertech has eyes and ears everywhere. If I expose myself, if I try to reconnect with my old life, they'll find me. And then it will all have been for nothing." Silence fell over them again, heavy with the weight of James's revelations. Chloe felt her heart break at the pain and loneliness she saw in his eyes, but she also felt a determination growing inside her. "James," she said softly, using his real name for the first time, "you are no longer alone in this fight. I want to help." He looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Chloe, you don't understand. This is dangerous. They won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way." "I understand perfectly," Chloe replied, her voice firm. "But I can't stand by knowing what I know now. There must be a way to expose the truth, to stop Cybertech." James shook his head, but Chloe could see a spark of hope in his eyes. "I don't know, Chloe. I've tried for so long." "Well, now you have help," she said, taking his hand. "We'll find a way, together." At that moment, sitting side by side on the cold sidewalk, Chloe and James sealed a silent pact. They didn't know what the future held, what dangers they would face, or what sacrifices they would have to make, but they did know that they were no longer alone. As night fell around them, Chloe felt a mixture of fear and excitement. Her life had changed irrevocably, and she knew there was no turning back. The road ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but looking at James, seeing the gratitude and determination in his eyes, she knew she had made the right choice. The cold Los Angeles wind blew around them, carrying with it the promises and dangers of tomorrow. Chloe squeezed James's hand, a silent gesture of solidarity and support. Together, they would face whatever came, determined to expose the truth and bring justice, no matter the cost. Chloe's apartment, a small studio in the heart of Los Angeles, was immersed in the gloom of the early morning. The soft light seeping through the barely closed curtains revealed a figure curled up on the sofa, eyes fixed on a laptop screen. Chloe hadn't slept. Since James's revelation, Her world had been turned upside down. She had spent the night researching cybertech industries, trying to find any clue that might corroborate James's story. What she found made her even more upset. Cybertech was a technological giant with tentacles stretching across many sectors. Its reputation was impeccable on the surface, but Chloe began to notice disturbing patterns: muffled reports, journalists suddenly changing their minds, competitors disappearing from the market without explanation. One name in particular caught her eye: Daniel Mason, his brother. Chloe hesitated, her cursor hovering over Daniel's phone number. She knew that involving him could be dangerous, but she also knew that she needed help. With a deep sigh, she pressed the call button. 3 rings later, Daniel's hoarse, sleepy voice filled the line. "Chloe, is that you? It's 5 in the morning." "Dan, I need to see you. It's urgent," Chloe said, her trembling voice betraying her anxiety. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Daniel spoke again, all trace of sleep had disappeared from his voice. "What happened? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, but it's complicated. Can you meet me at the cafe in an hour?" "I'll be there," Daniel replied without hesitation. An hour later, Chloe was sitting at a table at the back of the Morning Star Cafe, an untouched cup of coffee in front of her. Her eyes nervously roamed the place, checking every face, every movement. Daniel entered, his tousled brown hair and green eyes, so similar to Chloe's, scanning the room until he found her. He approached quickly, concern evident on his face. "Chloe, what's going on?" he asked, sitting down. Chloe took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "Dan, do you remember that story you were doing on cybertech a few months ago?" Daniel frowned, a glimmer of understanding flashing through his eyes. "The course I had to drop?" "Yes, I remember. Why?" I think I've discovered something you need to know," Chloe said, leaning forward. In a low voice, she began to tell him all about James and his revelations. As she spoke, Daniel's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, skepticism, concern, and, finally, fierce determination. "Chloe," he said when she had finished, his voice a mixture of admiration and fear, "do you have any idea how dangerous this is?" Chloe nodded, feeling a knot forming in her throat. "I know, Dan, but I can't just ignore it. We need to do something." Daniel was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table as he pondered. "Do you trust this James?" he finally asked. "Yes," Chloe replied without hesitation. "I know it sounds crazy, but I trust him." Daniel let out a heavy sigh. "All right, let's assume that all this is true. What do you propose we do?" Chloe felt a wave of relief run through her body. Her brother believed her. James said that cybertech is about to launch a new technology. If we can hack their servers, maybe we can find proof of what they're really planning. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Hack cybertech? Chloe, this isn't like hacking into someone's Facebook. We're talking about one of the most advanced technology companies in the world." "I know," Chloe replied, determination shining in her eyes. "But James is a computer genius. If anyone can do it, it's him." Daniel leaned back in his chair, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "This is crazy, you know that, right? We're talking about opposing a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They have resources, connections, if we get caught." "And if we do nothing?" Chloe interrupted, her voice shaking with emotion. "Dan, they're planning to invade the privacy of millions of people. We can't just stand by and let it happen." The brothers stared at each other for a long moment, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Daniel nodded slowly. "All right," he said, his voice low and determined. "I'm in, but we need to be extremely careful. No rash moves, understand? Chloe felt a wave of gratitude and love for her brother. "Thank you, Dan," she whispered, clasping his hand on the table. "Don't thank me yet," Daniel replied with a strained smile. "First, I need to get to know this James. If we're going to do this, we need to make sure we can trust him completely." Chloe nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. She knew that convincing Daniel to trust James wouldn't be easy, but it was a necessary step. "We'll meet him tonight," she said. "I'll text you the time and place." As they got up to leave, Chloe couldn't help noticing how different the cafe seemed now. The buzz of conversation, the aroma of the coffee, the sunlight coming through the windows, everything seemed more intense, more vivid. It was as if the world had taken on a new dimension of meaning. As they said goodbye on the sidewalk, Daniel held Chloe's arm, his eyes serious. "Be careful, Chloe. Don't trust anyone but me and this James, understand? Cybertech has eyes everywhere." Chloe nodded, feeling the weight of the situation fall on her shoulders. As she watched her brother walk away, she couldn't help but wonder what exactly she was getting herself into. But then she remembered James's eyes, full of pain and hope. She remembered the injustice, the threat hanging over millions of innocent people, and she knew, with a certainty that frightened and strengthened her at the same time, that there was no turning back. The game had begun, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Night fell over Los Angeles, a blanket of darkness dotted by the lights of the city that never sleeps. In a small, hastily rented apartment, 3 figures gathered around a makeshift table, their faces illuminated by the bluish light of multiple computer screens. Chloe watched, fascinated as James's fingers flew over the keyboard, lines of code quickly filling the screen. Daniel, for his part, alternated his gaze between James's work and the window, his tense posture revealing his constant vigilance. "We're almost there," James muttered, more to himself than to the others. "If I can just get around this firewall." Chloe felt her heart race. After days of careful planning, they were finally making their first attempt to hack Cybertech servers. The tension in the air was palpable, almost suffocating. Suddenly, the screens flashed, a series of error messages filling the main screen. James cursed quietly, his fingers working frantically to get around the problem. "What's going on?" Chloe asked, her voice shaky. "They've got layers of security I've never seen before," James replied, the frustration evident in his voice. "It's like the system is adapting to our attacks in real time." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes narrowed with concern. "Can they trace it back to us?" James hesitated for a moment, and that pause was enough to send a shiver of fear down Chloe's spine. I don't know," he finally admitted. "I took every possible precaution, but with technology like this." James's words were interrupted by a screeching sound. All the screens suddenly went black, except for a single message flashing red. "Intrusion detected." "Shit," Daniel exclaimed, rushing to disconnect the computers. "We've got to get out of here, now." The 3 of them moved in a frenzy of activity, disconnecting equipment and erasing traces as best they could. Chloe felt her heart hammering against her chest, fear threatening to paralyze her. They had barely left the building when they saw 2 black cars turning the corner, approaching quickly. "Run!" James shouted, grabbing Chloe's hand and pulling her into a side street. The 3 of them ran through the Los Angeles night, zigzagging through alleys and side streets, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing behind them. Chloe felt her lungs burning, her legs protesting, but fear drove her forward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they ducked into a dark alleyway, panting and trembling. Daniel peered carefully down the main street, his eyes scanning the area for pursuers. "I think we've lost them," he whispered, turning back to where Chloe and James were crouching. Chloe let out a muffled sob, the adrenaline finally giving way to the terror of the situation. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice shaking. James wiped his hand across his face, looking suddenly much older and tired. I don't know. Their security is much more advanced than I expected. I don't know if we can beat them." The silence that followed was heavy with fear and uncertainty. Chloe looked at her brother for some kind of comfort or guidance, but Daniel seemed as lost as she was. Maybe we should give up," Chloe whispered, the words leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. "It's too dangerous." James looked at her then, his eyes shining with a mixture of determination and desperation. "We can't give up, Chloe. If we do, cybertech will win. Millions of people will have their lives invaded, their privacy stolen. We can't let that happen." Daniel let out a heavy sigh. "He's right, Chloe. We've gone too far to turn back now, but we need to be more careful, smarter." Over the next few days, the tension continued to grow. Chloe noticed strange looks in the cafe, as if every customer was a potential cybertech spy. She began to see black cars on every corner, suspicious shadows in every alley. Working in the cafe became a daily challenge. Every whispered conversation between customers sounded like a possible threat. Her colleagues began to notice her distraction, her constant nervousness. "Chloe, are you okay?" asked Sarah, a fellow waitress, after Chloe downed her third cup of the day. "You seem distracted lately." Chloe forced a smile, feeling the weight of the secret she was carrying. "I'm fine, I just haven't been sleeping very well." The nights were the worst. Chloe found herself lying in her bed, staring at the ceiling, every noise from the city outside making her heart race. And when she finally got to sleep, her dreams were filled with endless chases and computer screens flashing menacingly. Meanwhile, James and Daniel were working tirelessly, looking for a new approach to penetrate cybertech's defenses. Chloe watched them, feeling simultaneously inspired by their determination and terrified by the potential consequences of their actions. One evening, while the three of them were gathered at their new hideout, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Chloe noticed something different in James's demeanor. He seemed more tense than usual, his eyes constantly darting to the shadows as if he expected something to emerge from them at any moment. "James?" she called softly, putting a hand on his shoulder. "What is it?" He turned to face her, and Chloe was struck by the intensity of the fear in his eyes. "Chloe, I think they're getting closer. Cybertech. I've noticed patterns, little things. I think they know we're here in Los Angeles." Daniel approached, his expression grave. "Are you sure?" James nodded slowly. "Almost sure. And if I'm right, we're all in mortal danger." The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She looked at her brother, at James, at the computer screens flashing around them. At that moment, the reality of the situation they were in hit her full force. They weren't heroes in an action movie. They were three frightened people, alone against a powerful and unscrupulous corporation. And now, the danger that had once seemed distant and abstract was becoming terrifyingly real. "What do we do now?" Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James and Daniel exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice firm despite the fear evident in his eyes. "Now, we prepare for the battle of our lives." The digital clock flashed relentlessly. 22:47. In less than 48 hours, cybertech would unleash its invasive technology on the world. The air in Chloe's small apartment was charged with tension and an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional sound of fingers tapping on keyboards. Chloe looked around, her heart clenching with a mixture of fear and determination. James was bent over his laptop, his eyes red with fatigue but glowing with a feverish intensity. Daniel paced back and forth, muttering to himself as he scribbled notes on a crumpled pad. "We need a new plan," Daniel finally said, breaking the silence. "Hacking their servers remotely is impossible. We need direct access." James looked up, an expression of defeat momentarily crossing his face before being replaced by steely determination. "You're right, but how? Their security is impenetrable." Chloe felt an idea begin to form in her mind. It was risky, dangerous even, but it could be her only chance. What if we broke into the launch event? The two men turned to her, surprised. Chloe continued, the words coming out hastily. "Think about it. All their attention will be focused on the event. It will be the moment when they are most vulnerable." Daniel frowned, considering the idea. It's risky, but it could work. If we gain access to the system during the event, we could not only get the evidence but also expose them live. James nodded slowly, his fingers already flying over the keyboard. "I could create a program to broadcast the evidence as soon as we get it. Millions of people would see the truth at the same time." The energy in the room changed instantly. Despair gave way to hope, however fragile. The three of them leaned over the table, furiously discussing the details of the plan. The hours passed in a blur of frantic preparations. Chloe used her contacts in the cafe to get waiters' uniforms for her and James. Daniel, meanwhile, forged press credentials that would give him access to the event. Meanwhile, James worked tirelessly on his program. "I need to make it untraceable," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "If they catch on before we start broadcasting, everything will be lost." Chloe watched him, feeling a wave of admiration and something else, something she wasn't ready to name yet. She moved closer, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You'll make it, James. I believe in you." He raised his eyes, meeting hers. For a moment, the world seemed to disappear around them. James covered her hand with his, a silent gesture of gratitude and something deeper. The moment was broken by Daniel clearing his throat. "We have a problem," he said, his tone grave. "I've just received information from a source. Cybertech has tripled security for the event. They're using a new facial recognition system." Chloe's heart sank. It means James can't get in," Daniel added. "They'd recognize him instantly." The silence that followed was deafening. All the planning, all the hope of the last few days seemed to crumble before them. It was Chloe who finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Then I'll go alone." "No!" James and Daniel exclaimed in unison. "It's the only way," Chloe insisted. "Daniel needs to be out there to coordinate everything, and James is too important for us to risk. I can do it." James stood up abruptly, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and admiration. "Chloe, you don't understand. If something goes wrong—" "I understand perfectly," she interrupted him, her voice soft but determined. "But we can't let Cybertech win. Not after everything we've been through." Daniel watched the exchange between the two of them, a complex expression on his face. Finally, he sighed. "She's right, James. This is our best chance." The next few hours were a whirlwind of final preparations. James taught Chloe the basics of how to operate the program, his gentle hands guiding hers over the keyboard. Daniel went over the plan countless times, making sure every detail was perfect. As the evening progressed, the tension in the apartment grew. Chloe could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, the magnitude of what they were about to do. When it was finally time to leave, Chloe felt her heart racing. She looked at James and Daniel, Two men who only a few weeks ago were strangers and now were the most important people in her life. "Are you sure about this?" James asked one last time, his eyes fixed on Chloe. She nodded, forcing a confident smile. "I am. Let's do it." Daniel hugged his sister tightly. "Be careful, Chloe. If anything looks wrong, get out of there immediately." Chloe turned to James. For a moment, they just stared at each other, unspoken words hanging between them. Then, on an impulse, James pulled her into a tight embrace. "Come back to me," he whispered in her ear, his voice tinged with emotion. Chloe pulled away slowly, feeling unshed tears stinging her eyes. "I'll be back," she promised. With one last look at the two men who meant everything to her, Chloe walked off into the night. The future was uncertain, the dangers were real, but she was determined. Tonight, they would change the world. As she walked towards the venue, Chloe felt a strange calm come over her. The fear was still there, pulsing beneath the surface. But there was something stronger, an unshakable determination. She looked up at the Los Angeles night sky, the stars almost invisible due to the city lights. Somewhere out there, millions of people lived their lives, oblivious to the danger that threatened them. Chloe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility. "It's time," she muttered to herself, adjusting her waitress uniform. With firm steps, she made her way to the back entrance of the event, ready to face whatever fate had in store for her. The Cybertech event hall glowed with an almost offensive opulence. Crystal chandeliers poured light over guests in gala attire, their laughter and chatter creating a constant buzz. Chloe, in her impeccable waitress uniform, moved among them like a ghost, her watchful eyes capturing every detail. Her heart beat furiously against her chest, but her hands remained steady as she poured glasses of champagne. Every forced smile, every "excuse me, sir," was a carefully constructed mask, hiding the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to consume her. "What's up, Chloe?" Daniel's voice whispered in her ear through the tiny, almost invisible earpiece. "Everything under control," she murmured, turning to pick up another tray. No sign of the main server yet. Across town, in an apartment improvised as an operations center, Daniel and James exchanged tense glances. James was leaning over his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he monitored the event's network activity. "Their firewall is impressive," James muttered, more to himself than to the others. "But every fortress has a crack." Back at the event, Chloe continued her careful dance among the guests. Her eyes settled momentarily on a man in a dark suit who seemed out of place. Security, she realized. Looking away quickly, she approached a group of executives. "The launch is in less than an hour," one of them said, his voice low but excited. "The world has no idea what's about to happen." Chloe felt a shiver run down her spine. She moved away discreetly, muttering into her earpiece, "Guys, I think we have less time than we thought." "Got it," Daniel's voice replied. "James?" "I'm almost there," James said, his voice tense with concentration. "Chloe, you need to find a way to access the control room. It's our only chance." Chloe swallowed, her eyes scanning the room. It was then that she noticed a discreet door in a corner, guarded by two men in suits. "I think I found it," she whispered. "But how am I going to get past security?" There was a moment of tense silence, then James's voice, low and determined. "You can do it, Chloe. Remember everything we practiced. You're stronger than you think." James's words ignited something inside Chloe. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked with purpose towards the door. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "Mr. Hawkins asked me to take this to the control room." She held up a covered tray that she had picked up in passing. The guards exchanged suspicious glances. "We weren't given any instructions about that," one of them said. Chloe forced an apologetic smile. "He just asked me. He said it was urgent for the presentation. If you want to check with him." The guards hesitated for a moment that seemed like an eternity. Then, finally, one of them nodded and opened the door. "Make it quick," he grunted. Chloe entered, her heart pounding. The control room was a maze of flashing screens and equipment. She quickly located the main server, exactly as James had described. "I'm in," she whispered, pulling a small device out of her pocket and connecting it to the server. "Great job, Chloe!" James's voice was filled with relief and pride. "Now, leave it to me." The next few minutes were an agony of waiting. Chloe could hear the muffled sound of the event outside, knowing that at any moment someone could walk in and discover her. "I did it!" James's triumphant exclamation almost made her jump. "Chloe, I'm accessing the files now. My God, it's worse than we imagined." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, his voice tense. "They're not just planning to invade people's privacy," James explained, his voice shaking with anger and horror. "They're developing a mind control system, mass manipulation through connected devices." Chloe felt her blood run cold. "James, we have to expose this, now." "I'm preparing the transmission," he replied. "Chloe, you need to get out of there, now." But before Chloe could move, the door opened. She turned, her heart stopping for a moment to see the CEO of Cybertech walking in, followed by two guards. "Well, well," he said, a cold smile on his face. "What do we have here?" Chloe felt panic threaten to consume her, but then James's voice sounded in her ear. "Chloe, the transmission has started. Keep him talking. Buy us some time." Gathering all her courage, Chloe straightened up. "Mr. Hawkins," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, "I think we have a lot to discuss about your project." Hawkins' smile faltered for a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about, girl." "Guards, arrest her." "Are you sure you want to do that?" Chloe asked, a smile forming on her lips. "Because right now, millions of people are watching a live broadcast exposing all your plans." Hawkins's face paled. He turned to one of the guards. "Check that, now." The guard ran over to one of the computers, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking, "it's true. We're in the air." Chaos ensued. Hawkins was shouting orders, the guards were running around, and Chloe remained standing, an island of calm in the middle of the storm. Outside, the event had turned into pandemonium. The screens that were supposed to show the launch of the new product now displayed confidential documents, incriminating emails and detailed plans of the mind control project. Chloe could hear the guests' cries of shock and indignation, the sound of glasses breaking and people running. But above all that, she could hear James's voice in her ear. "You did it, Chloe. You saved millions of people." As the guards took her away, Chloe felt no fear. She knew she had done the right thing. And as she walked through the hall in chaos, she saw in people's eyes not condemnation, but gratitude and admiration. The night that should have been Cybertech's triumph had turned into its downfall. And at the center of it all was Chloe, a simple waitress who had the courage to stand up to a corporate giant and win. As police sirens began to sound in the distance, Chloe closed her eyes and smiled. The nightmare was over. The truth was out, and she, against all odds, had changed the world. The rising Los Angeles sun bathed the city in shades of gold and pink, a beauty that contrasted dramatically with the chaos of the last 24 hours. Chloe watched the landscape from the window of her small apartment, an untouched cup of coffee cooling between her hands. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind was electrified, reliving the events of the night before. The headline screamed across all the news channels: Cybertech exposed, mind control plan revealed, anonymous heroine takes down tech giant, Cybertech CEO and executives arrested in federal operation. The world Chloe knew had changed irrevocably, and she was at the center of it. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. Daniel entered, his eyes tired but shining with pride. "How are you feeling, little sister?" Chloe tried to smile, but felt unexpected tears welling up in her eyes. "Honestly, I don't know. Relieved, scared, exhausted, all at the same time." Daniel wrapped her in a tight hug, and Chloe finally allowed the pent-up emotions to flow. She cried silently into her brother's shoulder, letting out all the tension and fear of the last few weeks. "You were incredible, Chloe," Daniel murmured, his voice breaking. "You saved millions of people. Mom and Dad would be so proud." The mention of his deceased parents brought a fresh wave of emotion. Chloe gently pulled away, wiping away the tears. "And James? Any news?" Daniel shook his head. "Nothing yet. He disappeared straight after the broadcast. He's probably staying hidden until things calm down." Chloe felt a tightness in her chest. In the few weeks she had known James, he had become such an important part of her life. The thought of not seeing him again was almost unbearable. The next few days were a whirlwind. Chloe was exonerated of all charges, her action considered an act of civic heroism. Jamal, or Dr. James Allen as the world now knew him, had his true identity re-established and was hailed as a reluctant hero. Chloe found herself at the center of a media storm. Reporters camped outside her apartment, eager for an exclusive interview with the waitress who saved the world. Job offers poured in from all sides: tech companies, civil rights organizations, even Hollywood studios wanting the rights to her story. But in the midst of all this chaos, Chloe felt strangely empty. The cafe where she had worked for years now seemed a strange place, the customers looking at her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity that made her feel uncomfortable. Her daily routines, once so comforting, now seemed empty of meaning. It was during one of these restless nights that Chloe received an unexpected phone call. "Chloe?" James's voice sounded on the other end of the line, sending a shiver down her spine. "Can we meet?" Hours later, Chloe found herself in a small seaside park, the sound of the waves crashing on the beach a soothing counterpoint to the turmoil in her heart. James appeared like a shadow, his eyes tired but shining with a light Chloe hadn't seen before. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, resisting the urge to touch him. James nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Better than I've been in years. Chloe, I can't thank you enough. You didn't just save the world, you saved me." Chloe felt tears burn her eyes. "James, But before she could continue, the sound of screeching tires interrupted the moment. A black car came out of nowhere, and masked men jumped out, grabbing James before any of them could react. "Chloe, run!" James shouted, struggling against his captors. Chloe stood paralyzed for a moment, shock and fear immobilizing her. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she sprang into action. She ran towards the car, screaming for help, but it was too late. The vehicle sped away, taking James and leaving Chloe alone, her cry of despair echoing in the night. The next few hours were a blur of police sirens, interrogations, and paralyzing fear. Daniel arrived, his face pale with worry. "Chloe, what happened?" Through tears and sobs, Chloe told him about the kidnapping. It was then that the terrible truth came out. The CEO of Cybertech, Marcus Hawkins, had escaped from custody. His last desperate move was to capture James and use Chloe as bait. "He wants revenge," Daniel muttered, his voice shaking with anger. "And he's using you two to get it." Chloe felt a wave of determination rise up inside her. The fear was still there, pulsing beneath the surface. But now there was something stronger, an iron resolve to save James and end this once and for all. "I won't let him win," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Not after everything we've been through." The next few days were a race against time. Chloe and Daniel worked tirelessly with the authorities, following leads, analyzing evidence. With each passing moment, Chloe felt the weight of guilt and fear growing in her chest. She couldn't bear the thought of James suffering because of her. It was during a particularly frustrating night, when all the clues seemed to lead to dead ends, that Chloe had an epiphany. "The code," she muttered, her eyes widening with realization. "James left a coded message in the program we used to hack cybertech." With renewed energy, Chloe and Daniel pored over the code, deciphering James's hidden message. It was an address, the location of a former cybertech bunker now abandoned. The final confrontation was intense and terrifying. Chloe, Daniel, and a team of federal agents stormed the bunker, taking on Hawkins's henchmen in a fierce battle. Amid the chaos of gunfire and explosions, Chloe found James, wounded but alive. "You came," he whispered, his eyes shining with a mixture of pain and relief. "Always," Chloe replied, helping him to his feet. But victory was not yet assured. Hawkins emerged from the shadows, a gun pointed at them. His eyes glowed with a madness born of despair and defeat. "You've ruined everything," he snarled. "My empire, my dreams, all destroyed by a waitress and a ghost." Chloe stood in front of James, facing Hawkins with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "It's over, Hawkins. You've lost." The moments seemed to stretch on endlessly. Chloe could hear her heart beating furiously, feel the warmth of James's body behind her. Then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Daniel emerged from behind a pillar, knocking Hawkins to the ground. The gun went off, the bullet passing inches from Chloe. In an instant, the agents burst in, subduing Hawkins and his men. As the handcuffs were placed on Hawkins, Chloe turned to James, tears of relief streaming down her face. Wordlessly, they embraced, all the tension and fear of the last few weeks dissolving in that moment of connection. Weeks later, with the dust finally settled, Chloe found herself back in that same seaside park. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. James was by her side, his presence a silent comfort. "What do we do now?" Chloe asked softly, her eyes fixed on the ocean. James smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his eyes. "We live, Chloe. We live, and we keep fighting for what's right." Chloe nodded, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced for a long time. The future was uncertain, but she knew she would face whatever came, with James by her side and the strength she had discovered within herself. As the sun disappeared over the horizon, Chloe understood that her journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only the beginning. With James, Daniel, and the courage she had discovered in herself, she was ready to face whatever challenges the future brought. The world had changed, and Chloe with it. The waitress who once dreamed of a simple life now saw herself as a defender of truth and justice. And as the stars began to dot the night sky, Chloe knew, with a certainty that warmed her heart, that no matter what tomorrow brought, she would be ready. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to like and subscribe to my channel. Your support motivates me to keep sharing exciting stories nearly every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to unfold on your screen. I greatly appreciate your backing. Hope to see you soon.